Knowledge Area PMP Exam Summaries. Scope Management. As you study scope management for your PMP exam, take note that planned scope management is one of those unique processes that has more than one key output. The key output of planned scope management is the scope management plan and the requirements management plan. This is very important. I've found lots of students think that the requirements management plan is an output of somewhere else. No, it's not. When you derive both of these plans, they become inputs to collect requirements. In collect requirements, the project manager should elicit these requirements from stakeholders, end users, the sponsor, and other stakeholders, and this will be put into a requirements traceability matrix. In addition to this output from collect requirements, you also have requirements documentation, which clarifies how those requirements that have been collected will meet the needs of the business. After these requirements have been collected, the next step will be to define the work that is needed to deliver the requirements. I've found students confusing collect requirements and define scope, but they are actually two different processes. Entirely different in that collect requirements identifies the features in the product, service, or result to be delivered, while define scope clarifies the work that must be carried out to deliver a deliverable with those requirements. Features versus work. They are two different processes. What you want in the deliverable is different from the work that must be carried out to achieve the features in that deliverable. In defined scope, our major output is a project scope statement. Now, do not confuse the project scope statement with the statement of work talked about in the Develop Project Charter process. Again, we're talking about two different documents. The project scope statement, which is an output of defined scope, is a document that encapsulates the inclusions, exclusions, constraints, and assumptions. And in addition, it defines what exactly the deliverable should look like, what it should feel like. It also defines the work that must be carried out to achieve the features, the requirements that have been defined previously. Also, as part of the project scope statement, we could have the acceptance criteria for the deliverable. So this is quite a robust document that I would advise you to look into in more detail. The next process is create WBS. So, with your project scope statement as a key input and the scope management plan guiding you on the process for it, you will create the WBS next. The work breakdown structure is one of the sacred cows of the PMI that close attention must be paid to. Make sure you understand how the work packages are the lowest level of the WBS, the planning packages are above the work package, and control accounts are above the planning package. Also be aware that the root node is the highest level in the work breakdown structure. Remember, the WBS numbering system, the code of accounts, is also a regular feature on this exam. You will need to identify certain components and know which level these components are at. The next process here is validate scope, in which the customer inspects the deliverable. Now, there is a huge shift from planning all the way to monitoring and controlling, where we have validate scope. In validate scope, the customer is checking the deliverables. Now, whatever those deliverables are, they are checked here. They could be documentation deliverables specified in a contract, plan-oriented deliverables, baseline-oriented deliverables, products, services, or results. It may appear confusing to people who think validate scope should happen before executing, because they think of validate scope as a final check before proceeding into executing. While that could be true, on the flip side, you also need to see this as inspecting that deliverable, the final product, service, or result from the project. If indeed plans and baselines and other documents are deliverables that need to be signed off on, then you could also see validate scope as fulfilling that need. But it is in the monitoring and controlling process group. Last but not least, we have control scope, in which the project manager should take note of the requirements and the work that has been previously defined and all the aspects of the project management plan in order to guide the team to do exactly what is required, no more, no less. This is where variance analysis comes in handy as a tool and technique to ensure that the team is doing only the work required to deliver the unique product, service, or result. Some students wonder why validate scope comes before control scope. I took a poll of fellow REPs, and the result was the order and representation of these in the PMBOK guide should not be a benchmark for how these are carried out in the real world. In some instances, you may find validate scope happening first as a result of signing off on deliverables of a planning and baseline nature. And at the same time, validate scope could be after control scope. It really depends on the context. Make sure you understand the context as you study for the exam. Now, the major output of Create WBS is the scope baseline. This scope baseline will ultimately become part of your project management plan, and that will become an input to both validate scope and control scope. And that concludes our review of the scope management knowledge area. If you are prepping for your PMP exam and you're looking for a 35 contact hour course, visit www.praizion.com. Sign up for a 35 contact hour course, which starts at 1 week all the way to 6 months.